Good afternoon. My name is Corazon Alvina. Thank you for making time to join us this afternoon for the online lecture series of the Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo, Muscat. Public programs such as lectures, workshops, and conferences are tasks that museums, education and research or resource centers tend to. Muscat's public programs are themed to address the interests of its target audiences: students, academe, millennials, cultural workers, and animators within the ambit of the general public. It works to be in support of safeguarding tangible and intangible heritage, to assist in the recognition and celebration of Philippine cultures, and to make a positive difference in the efforts to change beliefs about and the prevailing attitude towards the Philippine Katutubo. This afternoon, we are proud and thrilled to present Dr. Ramon Santos, National Artist for Music, to give us modernism in Lumad expressive traditions. Ramon, maraming salamat sa pagpapaunlak sa aming anyaya. We shall get to know Dr. Santos better later when he is introduced befittingly by our Muscat colleague. Meanwhile, with your indulgence, I will take about 2 minutes to introduce Muscat, a foundation involved in museum development and cultural education, with Unilab as its main benefactor. Muscat's mission and vision are about Philippine knowledge, kaalaman, ancestral and contemporary, across ethno-linguistic groups to sharpen our awareness of who we are for ourselves and the rest of the world. It provides opportunities to engage the public in discovering, recuperating, understanding, appreciating, and celebrating the complex layers of Filipino kaalaman. Muscat tends to museological functions such as research, curatorship, public programs, publications, and collections management, principally at this time, conservation and registration. Muscat is animated by an understanding that kaalaman is inherited and transmitted. It recognizes and rejoices in the aesthetic integrity and creative philosophy, in the outstanding skills and the commitment of our artists. It acknowledges the diwa, spiritual sense and essence in kaalaman. Muscat respects the bonds between humans and their environment and the balance that must be maintained between them. It searches for the inspiration behind processes that bring forth the most exquisite textile, the handsomest weapon, astonishing basketry. It is sensitive to the physicality and materiality of the objects themselves to steer not only the study of forms and technology, but also the appropriate conservation strategy for the well-being of cultural objects. Muscat is a generous, passionate sharer of learnings, memories, and stories. The kaalaman held by objects. It is the desire and hope of Muscat to encourage, inspirit, and invigorate pride, admiration, and affection for kaalamang katutubo, as indeed for and in all things Philippine. I promised you a proper introduction of Dr. Santos. I'd like our colleague in Muscat to do the honors. May I ask Ramon Santiago to take over, please? Ramon?
Thank you, Ms. Cora, and a pleasant good afternoon to all. Allow me to introduce our speaker this afternoon. National artist for music, Ramon Pagayon Santos, born 1941, belongs to the new and experimental music group of Filipino composers. He trained in composition and conducting at the at the University of the Philippines, and earned his master's degree in music with distinction at the Indiana University, and his PhD degree at the State University of New York in Buffalo. Okay. As a composer, Professor Santos' works has been conceived along concepts and aesthetic frameworks of Philippine and Southeast Asian artistic tradition, and featuring elements from Western and non-Western sources. Professor Santos has been a member or has headed the prestigious musical bodies and has represented the Philippines in the governing bodies of the international music community. He has held the top posts for music in the UP College of Music, the UP Center for Musicology, the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, among many others. He is currently University Professor Emeritus at the UP and President of the Musicology Society of the Philippines. Uh, Before we proceed, a word or two on the presentation this afternoon. We will begin with the talk, and then later, Professor Santos has so generously agreed to answer questions. Please post your questions to the Facebook comment box. We will try to respond to all questions within the time allotted. Now, without further ado, Muscat is proud to present National Artist for Music and UP Professor Ramon Santos and his talk, Modernism in Lumad Expressive Tradition.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the Museo ng Kaalamang Katutubo for this invitation to share with you this afternoon some of the things that I discovered in the course of my researches in Mindanao some years ago. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Cora Alvina, who heads the Museo, for this gracious invitation. The title of my presentation this afternoon is Modernism in Lumad Expressive Traditions. In recent years, indigenous and folk practices have been providing people all over the world cultural emblems and symbols of ethnicities and national identities. Although ancient cultural traditions have caught the interest of the intellectual world since the turn of the century, these were mostly treated as objects and static specimens valued for scientific inquiry on history and evolution. Moreover, their artistic, theoretical, and cultural significance were usually assessed according to Western paradigms. As an example of this, all sound-related expressions are now being called music when they are not. Just like the Passion, which is a form of prayer ritual, the Bayok of the Maranao, which is supposed to be an oratory, or the Badiw of the Ibaloy, which is a sung poetry, or the epics, which are narratives. Today, cultures and traditions are becoming more appropriately recognized to possess their own worldview, cosmology, theoretical constructs, and conceptual foundations. For the last 4 decades, the artistic world has been exploring traditional cultures for new contexts, new materials and techniques, new aesthetic parameters, and artistic directions. Furthermore, the old perception that culture outside Western civilization are static is hardly tenable against the realities of cultural dynamics and the phenomenon of change. Thus, in spite of these varying time perceptions, the idea of old and new is a universal given in the realm of human consciousness and experience. In the Philippines, the study of indigenous cultural resources, with special emphasis on oral traditions, has become a serious preoccupation in modern education today as we search for cultural roots towards reaching a comprehensive definition of a Filipino identity. This confrontation between ancient traditions and the cultural mores of a Western-oriented dominant mainstream society has merely added fuel to the process of acculturation and the continuous undermining of the authenticity and basic integrity of these traditions. From the 1960s to the 21st century, these concerns led to various calls for cultural preservation, ranging from the most radical means of isolating and museumizing cultural symbols to the more pragmatic and creative utilization of education and principles of active participation. These concerns are of course valid inasmuch as mainstream perspective is concerned. On the other side of the cultural spectrum is an emic view of things. Emic is the way practitioners look at their own practice, as against ethic, which is how outsiders look at a different culture. This emic view, which has been inadvertently omitted in the mainstream worldview, has been the chief cause in the escalation of the issues of cultural survival on behalf of oral traditions. In this brief presentation, I would like to focus on how the other side views tradition and survival in the context of contemporary life. I would like to share some interesting illustrations of the enculturated response by native artists in the form of self-willed changes in the musical repertoires of the lumads. You know, the lumads are the tribal Filipinos in the upland Mindanao. Enculturation means the development of practice by the practitioners themselves. This paper is part of the output of a study that was supported by the National Research Council of the Philippines on the musics of selected communities in Eastern Mindanao in 1997 and 1998. Now let's go to tradition and change. Among indigenous and folk cultures in the Philippines, the lumads of Eastern Mindanao perhaps count as some of the least exposed mainstream culture during the first half of the 20th century. On the other hand, a fast-track program for national integration as a priority government concern for the island of Mindanao and Sulu has dramatically heightened the consciousness for cultural and national integration, not only between Muslims and Christians, but also among the Lumads or tribal communities in the eastern uplands of Mindanao. In spite of the lack of serviceable roads beyond 10 to 20 kilometers from the town proper, people have found ways of traveling with reasonable speed between localities and the centers of population and commerce by means of sturdy motorbikes called Skylab, which can take on 3 to 4 passengers aside from the driver. The Christian Church is also actively contributing to the change and cultural integration. The Tribal Filipino Association as Apostolate in Malita, Davao del Sur, operates a DepEd authorized center on for the Manobo, the Tagakaolo, the Bilaan, and other Lumads with the main task of training tribal personnel for community education. Most of the performing artists who have consciously preserved their traditional heritage are also serving as community leaders, either as barangay sanggunian members or officers, or both both municipal and provincial offices of the Southern Cultural Communities, or OSA. This was formerly the Panamin during the Marcos regime. These changes in the lifestyle and social perspective of the Lumads are very much reflected in their modern musical repertoires. Although their musical practice covers different media like the kudlong, which is a boat lute, the saluray, which is a polychordal zither, and the udol, which is a log drum, as well as vocal music. This paper or this presentation shall limit its focus on the Gong repertoire of the Bagobo, specifically the Bagobo Jangan of Kalinan in Davao City, the Bagobo Tagabawa of Binaton and Bansalan, Davao del Sur, and the Kalagan of Datuloho. Gong music is considered central to the spiritual and social life of the Lumads for several reasons. First, for communication with the metaphysical world. Two, for transcending physical distance in communication between humans. Three, for public entertainment. Four, for expressing strong feeling and emotion. And five, as sacred objects. Gong music is generally referred to as tagungguan. The instrument is a set of 6 to 11 gongs suspended from a frame in semi-pyramid formation from the lowest, which is called the bandilan or bandiran, to the highest, called patulusan. Smaller sized gongs are called kulintang, and the larger size are agong or luming tagunggua. The lowest gong functions as the rhythmic drone, while the rest of the gongs are categorized as tagungguan, which in the context of upland Mindanao music could mean melody, playing, or music making. In the Gong chime tradition of Eastern Mindanao, the principle of drone and melody is clearly delineated. The most interesting aspect that surfaced in the course of the study is the issue of change in both theory and practice in their musical traditions. This change is evident not only in the repertoires and aesthetic orientation, but in the whole concept of traditional ethnic musical expression in the context of a modern musical world. Tribal communities have modified their cultural emblems in response to perceived expectations of contemporary cultural life. Many artists have formed their own performing groups, mostly made up of extended family members. Roger Sawangan, who is the Calagan Tribal Division Head of the Office of Muslim Affairs, leads his own family-based Calagan dance troupe, and he introduces himself as a consultant to Joey Ayala and Ramon Obusan, as you know, these two leading figures in the ethnopop and folkloric dance worlds. The instruments consist of an 8-gong kulintang laid in a row, a suspended agung, and a goblet-shaped drum, the dabakan. Their musical rendition is similar structurally to the kulintang uh, music of the Maguindanao, based on rhythmic modes but closely associated with different dances. The kulintang pieces without dance are considered exhibition pieces, such as the kinagan or binarig. Roger Sawangan has demonstrated that he is able to play the different kulintang styles and repertoires of the Magindanaoan, the Maranao, and the Tausug, which are three major Muslim communities in southern Mindanao. Now let's listen a little bit to Kinagan. On the other hand, Maximo Gabaw, a Bagobo Datu, has responded to the commercial demand for tribal experience by setting up an elaborate display of Bagobo cultural paraphernalia in his house, intended for viewing by visitors, before doing a show of music and dance numbers performed by himself, his wife, sister, and grandchildren in full regalia. The museum-like setup shows different items of the elaborate Bagobo dress, headwear, belt, necklace, etc., to gongs, the two-string lute, the polychordal zither, complete with labels in 2 languages. His repertoire of musical numbers are painted on a hanging wooden plank and a sign that tells the price of a musical performance, which is 1,500 pesos. While visitors wait for a performance to start, a recording of his gong music plays in the karaoke machine. He also gives away a prepared folio of notes on Bagobo cultural practices, music and dances, and copies of his own citations. With several years of participating in tribal competitions, regional festivals, civic and political gatherings, as well as some occasional national and international events, just like the Philippine Festival in Paris in 1995, wherein the groups have set up their ready wardrobe, repertoires, variably programmed to suit the researchers, tourists, and impresarios, as well as instruments and stage properties. These changes reflect a whole process of enculturation that is being molded by several interfacing motivations. First, the preservation of ethnic identity. Two, survival of the cultural tradition in the face of modernity. Three, expansion of the repertoire by accommodating new compositions. Four, secularization and commercialization of traditional emblems as a response to cultural exploitation of outside forces. And five, the integration into the national cultural mainstream. The story of how the kulintang of Datu Malandoy Munoy, Bagobo Jangan from Kalinan in Davao City, evolved from 5 to 12 gongs is a classic illustration of enculturation in a Lumad musical culture. According to Munoy, the original number of gongs in the kulintang, and the luming tagonggua for that matter, was 5. The old music, called taka, which was used in rituals, was played with only 5 gongs, including, of course, the bandir, which is the lowest gong. Let's listen to the taka. Okay. The second stage of evolution is placed in the 1920s when a master artist by the name of Sadani began to secularize the repertoire. He added 2 more gongs and composed music that told stories. The term tagungo, referring to the tune composition as opposed to the drone of the bandil, is attributed to Sadani. One such tune is entitled Pangayaw, a piece that tells of the revenge of Tulalang, a Bagani or warrior hero, on the infidelity of his wife. The music of the Pangayaw also accompanies a dance of two warriors armed with spear and shield. Of course, we cannot have that dance. But here is the Pangayaw. The music of Sadani flourished until the Japanese occupation. In 1941, through the end of the American regime in 1946. In 1948, the 12-year-old Munoy entered the local elementary school, where he encountered the world of folk songs in the Western idiom. To his amazement, he learned that some of the songs had more than 7 tones. In his desire to replicate these songs on the Kulintang, the young Munoy devised a set of 12 improvised gongs. So, from 5 to 7, now to 12. And he improvised these gongs from empty sardine cans. Today, Munoy's repertoire includes such pieces as the Japanese Arasima and the popular tune Pitong Gatang. His style of playing has also been enhanced by the addition of a second voice. Let's listen to Arasima. I hope you can hear the second voice. Okay. The cousin of Malandoy Munoy, Maximo Gabaw, previously we saw his house with the exhibits. Maximo Gabaw has further extended the repertoire to include popular Western tunes, such as Silent Night and Joy to the World. In 1987, Maximo Gabaw stated that they are now able to play various types of music, from Muslim tunes to Christian songs. However, he considers the new music much simpler than the original Bagobo music, since he thinks that it is difficult for the younger generation to learn the original dance steps of old, the Gabaw and Munoy families are now playing easier music they call hot music, which they believe is more attuned to the temperament of today's youth and therefore more easily understood. The old music, according to Gabaw, is now heard merely as intermission numbers. Okay, let's listen to Silent Night. Okay, now let's listen to Joy to the World. Let's see if you can recognize the tune. Okay, now let's listen to what he calls hot music. You see, it's quite fast. Okay. These examples show the changes in the performance practice of the Bagobo Jangan from Kalinan that have transpired in the 20th century. First, the increase in the number of gongs in the Kulintang and the Luming Tagunggua. Two, the expansion and greater secularization of the repertoire to accommodate new compositions and the adaptation of non-Bagobo songs. Three, the adoption of the harmonic principle in the rendition of tunes. And four, the adoption of faster tempo to conform to the temperament of a younger generation of players and dancers. As you know, before, the gongs were only used for rituals, and now it has been secularized and even playing tunes that are conducive to the young generation. In contrast to the raw and rural quality of the rendition of the Bagobo Jangan is the dynamic, well-polished, and pre-programmed musical numbers of the Tagabawa ensemble. This is Bagobo Tagabawa from the lowland town of Bansalan. The small group is led by Datu Molino Ogit and Juna Roman, who count among their many distinctions their having been named as the best tribal performing ensemble in Region 11 and the All Mindanao competitions of 1986. The height of their public exposure was capped by their participation in the Philippine Festival in Paris, jointly organized by the Cultural Center of the Philippines and the French government. The set of Agong that Ogit and Roman and their assistant assembled consisted of 10 gongs, looking very old, with some bosses already thinned and cracked from long years of music making. The agong of the Tagabawa is played for courtship and wedding, and in recent years, for birthday anniversaries. While there are still people in Bansalan who can play the agong, only Molino Ogit and Juna Roman have put together a repertoire of pieces to be played in sequence as a suite, complete with introduction, middle parts, and ending. The selection that was first played by Ogit and Roman consists of the following parts, which somehow reflect important aspects in the Bagobo life cycle. The first, Sarupat Katambara, offering to the Anito. 2, Gugma Dayan Kamat, clearing of the fields. 3, Parmas, which means planting. 4, Panag-aso, which means hunting. 5, Pangalyag, courtship. 6, Pangataye, war dance. And 7, Pagkatul, harvesting. And 8, Katal, means wedding. The different rhythms correspond to the movements and dance steps that portrayed or reenact the above activities. Now, let's listen to just a little bit of this because it's quite long. Now is faster. Okay. The second selection that we are going to hear is a welcome dance performed by a young lady, Clara Ugal, accompanied on the agung using the tunes of the Philippine national anthem, Bayang Magiliw, and the slower version of the Baleleng. A third rendition is a demonstration of the Tagongo Choir, a multi-voiced or multi-part performance by 4 persons, one playing the drone on the bandilan, another playing ostinato figures on the gongs 2 and 3, a third musician playing melodic accompaniment on gongs 1, 3, and 4, while Molino Ogit plays the tagungo or melodic improvisations on the gongs 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Another variation of gong grouping is bandihan, gongs 1, 2, 3, gongs 4, 5, and gongs 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, this is a very new development uh, on the gong playing of the upland people. It should be noted that the so-called choir style, because of the multi-voiced, is not exclusive to the Tagabawa, but is widely practiced by other hanging gong cultures in Mindanao. In a separate performance, the entire musical rendition accompanied the dance of Clara Ugal, whose movements and steps covering a much wider floor area have been choreographed by Molino Ogit himself, showing the awareness of contemporary stage blocking. Let's listen. Now the tune is Baleleng. There's Clara Ogal. Okay. The evolution of instruments in terms of physical form and enhanced musical capabilities, the expansion of the repertoires by adapting structural and formal principles from foreign musical traditions, the development of new technical and compositional procedures, such as the adoption of harmonic and multi-voice texturing, are all indicative of a dynamism in the musical tradition of the lumads of Eastern Mindanao. A concept of modernism exists in these musical practices, as in other cultural traditions all over the world, even without the imposition of alien values from a dominant mainstream culture. Moreover, our brief illustrations here have also shown the resiliency of these cultures to maintain and preserve fundamental aesthetic parameters in their musical expressions while responding to the challenges for relevance in a contemporary social environment. Thank you at maraming salamat po.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Santos, for your most informative and well-researched presentation. At this point, we will be taking questions from our viewers. Can we proceed, Doc? Doc?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We have a question here, Doc, from our group, Muscat. We would like to know how musicians are developed. How are they mentored? Do they apply, or are they chosen by the masters for their aptitude, or if there is a prospect?
Well, this the way oral traditions are transmitted are simply by participation, So the younger generation usually take that up. There is no formal tutoring or anything like that, and so. But in fact, again, when we visited. For example, I brought our students uh, uh, to the Bagobo Jangan, no? And so they were taught by these people, okay? But as I said, it was through participation. It's not a formal, tutoring or formal teaching that they are doing. Okay.
Okay. Another question, sir. Um, with regards to documentation, are the music written down on paper or committed to paper, much like Western music or modern music for that matter, is written down?
No, no, these are not written down. Well, for researchers like me, for example, when I was doing research among the Ibaloy, I transcribed the music, and actually, it's published in the book that I wrote. No, uh, but they do not really write their music. No, it's an oral tradition.
Okay. But, sir, what forms of documentation can we expect if we will endeavor to preserve for posterity these pieces?
Well, of course, now we have the technology, no? uh, we can always use our videos and the audios and recording equipment. In fact, in the UP Center for Ethnicity, there are what we are doing now at the Center for Ethnomusicology is returning these recordings to the places that where they were taken, you know. Uh, in fact, we just went to Kabayan about 2 years or 3 years ago, and we handed them the recordings of their own music, which, by the way, are really endangered because, the youth don't care so much about and so that's why we uh, we return this music to them so that they will continue and they will be inspired by those who uh, by the experts who played them before.
Okay. And are these recordings accessible, Doc, from UP? Uh,
Yes, of course.
okay.
Yes. Uh, it is that is the main that's the main mandate of the UP Center for Ethnomusicology,
Okay.
for scholars and whoever are interested in listening or learning about this music.
Okay. My own question, Doc, actually, it came from my son because he's also a student of music. Um,
Oh,
where does where does one is taking music education at PWU? Uh,
oh,
his question, Doc, is where does one actually go to view, to relish the actual performances? Do these masters from Mindanao, the players, do they come to Manila on a regular basis to do actual performances?
no, of course not. But there are, for example, I was the Secretary General of the NAMSIA. I don't know if you know what the NAMSIA is.
Yes.
Uh, and we included, of course, the traditional music there. Every November, uh, we invite the best players of traditional music to the CCP.
Mhm.
So that is one source.
Okay.
But of course, it's always good to go to the places, you
Okay.
know,
Oh.
where,
Like
uh,
you brought your students there. Opo.
yeah, yeah, of course. And it's not only the music, by the way, it's the whole life, you
Yes.
know.
The actual
Uh,
performance. Opo.
yeah,
Opo. Okay. Another question, Doc, from our group. Um, uh, you mentioned the trends happening among the lumads.
yes.
Is there a similar trend? And uh, can you cite differences or similarities with the Cordillera music?
Yes, of course. There's a group there led by Benny Sokong, you know.
Oh yes, apo. Si Mang Benny. Apo.
You know Benny.
Yes, apo.
Uh, you know, he has a school for living traditions.
Yes.
In fact, this is a good project of the NCCA, the schools for living traditions. Among the Tiboli, there's already a school for living traditions. So uh, this this is a good way of transmitting uh, the musical traditions to the younger generation. By the way, the School for Living Traditions of Benny Sokong caters to everybody, you know.
Yes.
Uh, and it is not only Kalinga culture, but he has experts from Bontok, from Ifugao, and all the other ethnic communities there. So again, this is a modern development, no? Uh, you know, before there was not no such thing
Mm.
as a center like Benny Sokong's School for Living Traditions. But because you know we are in contemporary times, so we have schools, we have all these facilities, and so you know it's just uh, what do you call that? It is very appropriate now uh, to make schools, you know,
Mm.
in these areas.
Okay. Okay, Doc. There are further questions from the viewers, Doc. Uh, from RM Bungalo. I don't know if I pronounce this correctly. How about the application of indigenous instruments for modern music, such as the use of synths? Has
The
What
use
is
of
your it's synths, synth. I don't really know what this is.
SYNTH. I don't know what
Yes.
that is.
Yes.
Anyway,
Oh. Mhm.
yes, many composers now are using. I have been using gongs, you
Mhm.
know, in my compositions, and in fact, I had a composition using all the traditional instruments of the ASEAN, you know.
Okay.
Uh, yes, of course, because you know you can no longer isolate these instruments. After
Okay.
all, you know, we are a whole community in the world. we have to share our music and our instruments and all the traditions and all that. So anyway, yes, but there must be a sort of respect for those traditions. Okay, uh, when you use these instruments, you know.
Mhm. Okay. Another question, sir, from Rachel Ann Labasan. Sir, we have been a great fan of your musical works um, and are familiar on your take of the revitalization in music. What are your tips for young aspiring composers of this age?
Well, I would say that you have to study the musics themselves. In fact, if it's possible, you have to go through you have to go to the places where these musics exist. No, just like what I did. Uh, I have done researches among the Ibaloy, among the Bontok, among the Lumads, of course, and among the even the Boholano. You know, uh, you have to go to the places themselves uh, in order for you to learn how they how they play the music, what is the music all about, what is the what's the function of the music, all of these you have to know before you use any of the music for your own expressions.
Okay. Another question, Doc, from River Naliano Talosig. It is framed in Filipino. Magandang hapon po. Sa mga katutubo po sa Northern Luzon, lalo na sa mga Ifugao, it is discouraged by the elders to record the music. Ang musika nila mula sa mga gongs at gangsa. Ganon din po ba sa katutubo sa Eastern Mindanao?
Hindi naman. Kasi nga, may mga music sila na hindi mo pwedeng talagang i-record, lalo na yung mga ritual na music, no? Pero yung mga music for entertainment, ayan, pwede yan. You have to choose also which music you have to record. And you have to ask permission from the owners of the music. Okay? Kaya iba-iba eh. Iba-iba yung mga pamamalakad nila tungkol sa kanilang ginagawa na paglalahad ng damdamin, no? Okay. Kaya you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful.
Okay. Another question from Jeffrey Solares, sir.
Oh.
Hi, Dr. Santos. Are these efforts of the Lumads to conform or adapt their their instrument construction or repertoire to modern mainstream trends to be encouraged or discouraged? What is your perspective on this?
Of course, we can encourage them because they are the ones who possess the music. They can do whatever they want to do with their music. Of course, meron diyang mga matatanda sa kanilang mga tribo, sa kanilang mga community na ayaw yung ganon. Okay?
Yes. Opo.
Hindi mo naman kagaya natin. Merong mga matatanda sa atin, mas gusto yung mga matatandang musika kaysa sa mga ano ngayon, di ba?
Yes,
Ganun din naman sa kanila. Oo. Kaya pare-pareho yan eh. Pare-pareho. Anyway, yun. Pero of course, we encourage them because that's how culture is not static. Okay?
Yes. Opo.
Talagang nag-iiba. In fact, ibang-iba na. Even yung mga gangsa nila sa Cordillera, for example, ibang-iba na tugtugan na yon. Kaya if you listen to recordings way back in the 1960s, ibang-iba na. Ibang-iba. But
Okay.
that's life, you know? Di ba? Habang nabubuhay tayo, humahanap tayo ng kung ano yung bago. Okay?
Okay. Sir, a personal question as someone who handles musical instruments for the Muscat collection.
Oo.
Are there marked differences between the old and the new musical instruments? May modification po ba silang ginawa sa mga agong nila na kakaiba nung unang panahon, sa mga sinaunang agong sa mga lumang tinutugtog nila?
I'm sorry. May mga nag-iiba.
Okay.
Pero yung mga agong, they remain the same. Practically the same.
Okay.
Pero yung mga nag-iiba, yung mga flauta, yung mga yung mga string instruments, yon. Mga lutes, yon.
Mm.
Minsan nilalagyan nila ng mga dekorasyon. Pero basically, the technique for playing them remains the same.
Okay. Okay. Good. There is a question from Ralph Louis C. Kotoko. Good afternoon, sir. I was wondering if it's appropriate to call a group who's developed into a modern status like barrio a tribe. Is it rude to call them a tribe? If so, how do we refer to them as a title or a group?
Ano yun? Ano yun? I'm sorry.
Ralph Lois was making the observation if it's appropriate to call these groups a tribe, kasi earlier you called them as tribes.
Hindi, wag na yun. Communities na, mas mas ano yun. Kasi lahat naman tayo belong to a tribe, di ba?
Opo.
Ako, Tagalog ako. Ganon.
Okay.
Yun ang ethnic group ko. Of course, itong mga terms na ito are still usable. Kaya lang yung connotation yan. Yung connotation na yung tribal ay parang ano ba 'yon?
Primitive.
Parang primitive, oo, ganon. Kaya as much as possible, mas mabuti yung communities.
Okay. Tapos may follow-through question siya, Doc. So are all the Lumad groups the same with other Lumad groups? Is it possible for those groups to unite, to share, and to show each other yung music at saka yung music making nila?
Oo, meron silang mga festivals eh. Like Kaamulan Festival, yun. I think that's the biggest festival in Mindanao eh. Yun, sumasali sila at nagkakakita-kita ng mga techniques, yung mga ganon. Alam mo, yung mga festival, kaya yung kagaya ng Rondalia, International Rondalia Festival na aking pinamumunuan, no? Ang festival ay hindi lang para lumigaya tayo o ma-entertain tayo. Hindi. Yung mga festival ay para magkakita-kita yung mga iba't ibang mga grupo kung saan makakapag-share ng kanilang, of course, we are talking about music here. So to share their music, okay? Kagaya nung Rondalia Festival ko, yun, merong music ng Pilipinas, of course, merong music ng Mexico, may music ang Israel, may music ang Russia, pero panay pluck strings, okay? Panay pluck strings. Doon sila nagkakakita-kita kung anong mga techniques, for example, ang ginagamit nila sa mga pluck strings nila. Yun, festivals are for sharing. Kaya we encourage the holding of these festivals because doon nagkakakita-kita yung mga pagkakaiba-iba natin. Okay?
Okay. Doc, siguro one more question. Good day, Dr. Santos. I'm a big fan of your music, and this is from Paul Erwin Bibal. Unfortunately, access to recordings of contemporary Filipino music today are limited, especially in this time na one cannot go to the library. Are there any plans to publish, to reproduce music of your works online or in the CD or in CD in the future?
Yes. Actually, bago itong COVID, nag-umpisa na kaming mag-record. Okay?
Okay. Opo.
Mag-record ng mga music ko. Oo. At mga 3 na yata yung nare-record Pero yun na nga, we are supposed to produce 2 CDs of my music.
Okay.
Ngayon, yung Rondalia naman, yung mga works ng Filipino composers ay ire-record din. Okay? Meron ng pera yan Oo. Kaya lang dinatnan tayo nitong COVID. Kaya naputo lahat.
Okay.
Okay.
Pero, Doc, how are they going to be promoted? Will they be given for free or will they be sold as a set?
Well, I don't know. If this is for example, I think the funding comes from the NCCA.
Okay.
So it will certainly be disseminated to schools, for example. No? Oo.
Okay. One final question, Doc, from Katz Jacosalem Tranco.
Oh.
Sir, I was just wondering if the lumads or the other groups, ethno-linguistic groups, are as concerned about preservation as you seem to be. Is preservation, the conservation of their heritage just as important to them?
Oh yes, of course. Pero yung preservation, hindi yung pine-preserve mo in a parang museo. Hindi.
Okay.
Sapagkat lahat yan ay living traditions
Yes.
yan. Okay? Ngayon, yung preservation, okay, meron kang mga museums, mga ganyan, mga institutions which preserve, like the UP Center for Ethnomusicology, pine-preserve niya. Pero yung preservation na yan, para lang matutunan kung ano yung pinanggalingan natin.
Okay.
Okay? Sapagkat ang buhay ay buhay eh. Hindi ba?
Mhm.
Tumutuloy yan. Ngayon, nakita natin dito sa mga lumads kung paano nila tinutuloy yung tradisyon nila. Yung bang joy to the world, kung tinugtog nila sa iyo yon, malalaman mo ba kung joy to the world yon o hindi?
Hindi ko nga, Doc,
Hindi, sapagkat ang ginagamit nilang lengguwahe ay yung kanilang lengguwahe. Okay? O yung, ano ba yon? Yung Silent Night.
Oo.
Oo.
Hinahanap ko nga, Doc, yung yung familiar rhythm nung
Oo. Pero ganun eh. Yun ang language nila. Pero sa kanilang pag-iisip, yun ang tinutugtog nila. Okay? It's, music is just language eh, hindi ba? May kani-kanyang mga accents, may kani-kanyang mga phrases, mga ganyan, mga sentences. Kaya ganon. We just have to learn these languages.
Opo.
Okay.
Doc, thank you for answering the questions. We really appreciate generously allotting time para sagutin sila yung mga questions ko pinili. Any last words, Doc, or any message before we conclude, before I turn over to Miss Cora?
Well, ang masasabi ko lang, kung yung tinatawag nating mga lumads o yung mga ethnic groups ay tayo rin ay ganon. Okay? Pantay-pantay tayo. Kaya dapat nating alamin para makabuo tayo ng isang bansa kung ano yung mga ginagawa nila, kung ano yung pag-iisip nila, kung ano yung mga aspirations nila sa buhay. Ganon din tayo. Kaya dapat matutunan natin yung kanilang mga gawi. Okay? In fact, we should not really try to enjoy the difference. Pero let us enjoy the wealth of our cultures. Marami tayong kultura. Pero lahat tayo, mga Pilipino, hindi ba? Sinasabi natin yan. So, yun ang masasabi ko. Kailangan nating aralin yung mga yon. At hindi parating nasa west, nasa kanluran yung ating mga pag-iisip. Okay? Ang nangyayari sa atin, parating kung ano yung nasa Amerika, yun ang gagawin natin. Okay? Yun lang. Kailangan nating mahalin kung ano yung atin.
Okay. Doc, maraming salamat po. That is all the time that we have for the question and answer. I would like to turn over the session to Ms. Cora for the concluding part of this presentation. Ms. Cora?
Maraming salamat sa paalala. Yan nga po ang adhikain ng Muscat. Yung pag-aralan at mahalin ng sariling atin, bagamat iba't iba sila, ay maraming commonalities, iisa pa rin sila. So heartfelt thanks for the elucidation about the changes in the theory and practice of the traditional music repertoires of the Lumad of Eastern Mindanao and the reasons for these. We hope we can invite you again to enrich our knowledge of Katutubo music and music in general, Filipino music. Maari po bang lecture on Rondalia music in February next year, Arts Month po? Baka naman makahiling kami. Hindi ko kayo pipilitin sumagot ngayon. Anyway, as well, we think... Pwede. Oh my
May
goodness.
concurrence na, ma'am. Oh.
Oh, sige, ililistap ko po namin yan at saka naka-record. As well, we thank you, our friends, participants, likers, and followers, very much for being with us. We hope to see you during our forthcoming gigs. Nandinig nyo si Dr. Santos in February. But before that, we have excellent lectures and lively and kaalaman-filled podcasts, which is a new thing for us, to celebrate Museums and Galleries Month and Buwan ng Katutubo this October. Please go to our Facebook page for the schedule as well as a new feature daily. Our YouTube channel is Muscat PH. We have Instagram posts as well. Do like us. Anyway, bilin ni Dr. Santos, we shall celebrate Philippine culture. Mabuhay. Do continue to stay safe at magandang hapon po sa kanilang lahat.